Okay, I think we're live. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this month's Azure Container Apps live stream. Joining me today is Sanchit. Sanchit, you want to say hi?
Hey everybody.
All right, Sanchit works on Azure Container Apps. He works on a lot of things. What kind of stuff do you work on?
So I work on Azure Container Apps consumption workload profile plans, and recently I've been working on the session sandboxes, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Nice. Yeah, actually, Sanchit is being modest. He works on a lot more than that. But yeah, yeah. So and I'm a PM on Azure Container Apps. It's going to be the two of us today. Pretty casual. We haven't done one of these for a while, so we usually start off with going through our newsletter, which was published yesterday. Let me put up the link. And yeah, so because we haven't really kind of done this for a while, there's actually quite a few links to go through, which is pretty exciting. So, and then we're going to go into our deep dive into the new dynamic sessions feature that we just announced last week or a couple weeks ago at Build. Some pretty exciting stuff there, especially if you haven't seen it. We have some hopefully pretty good demos, hopefully working demos that we can show you in a bit. So we'll start off by going through some of the links that we have in the newsletter. As always, we really appreciate it when you all kind of write blog posts or produce videos about container apps. Yeah, and like I said, this month we've been finding quite a few of them. I probably missed some. If I missed any, let me know, and we'll try to get them onto the next one. So let me hide that banner. All right, and we're just going to go through some of these links. All right, so the first one is an article by Daniel about what container apps is not. So there are a lot of different options, even within Azure, but if you look beyond Azure for deploying containerized workloads. And Daniel actually walks through quite a few pretty good points about what container apps is and isn't, especially when compared to the other options that we have in Azure. So yeah, check it out. It's a pretty good article. Next one is an article by Luke. It's got a pretty generic title, Azure Container Apps Overview. But as I started reading it and scrolling it, I'll be honest, I didn't finish reading it because there's tons of stuff in here. Luke actually dives into, even like just the, like how like the differences between microservices versus monolithic architectures. He goes into how to build these apps and then deploy them. And then eventually talks about all the differences between the different options again. And then all the things we're going to think about, and then ultimately deploying one of these things to Azure Container Apps. So a super long, super detailed, and a really good article on container apps and microservices in general. Thanks, Luke, for that. And I also found a pretty cool article from our friends at 1Password. The reason I brought this up is because I'm a user of 1Password, and I didn't know that you can actually deploy a component called the SCIM bridge on Azure Container Apps. It looks like this is only for like enterprise or business customers, and I don't really know what this bridge does, but I just thought it was pretty cool that that 1Password allows you to deploy a component to container apps. And next, we have an article from Yuri about Dapper and container apps. So, so this is talks about microservices again, but Yuri goes into the different things you can do with Dapper, as well as how to run that on container apps. Oh, and this one's a shameless plug for me. So about a year ago, I wrote a blog post about how to run kind of serverless playwright on container apps. And I promised to set like a part 2 of that, which is to deploy that on jobs. It took me 9 months to write this article. But hey, I wrote it. So it's done. And in it, I kind of go through how you can write a Azure Container Apps job that uses Playwright to every 5 minutes, hits the site, kind of like, clicks on links and stuff to make sure that the site's working. And then it'll save a recording of it, basically clicking through, as well as output basically availability metrics to Azure App Insights. So you can actually see on a chart basically how long it takes for each one of the runs for each one of the Playwright sessions to kind of click through the links, and it'll show green if it's actually working, or show an X if it's not working. And you can also see like charts and stuff about like how long each page took and things like that. So I think it's pretty cool. You should all check it out. And then ultimately we actually output that the videos onto an Azure file share. So yeah, right up. And the next one, actually maybe like Sanchit, not to put you on the spot, maybe you can talk a little bit about this. But it's an article by Jenny on our team about Project Legion, which is, I don't know if there's a diagram, but it's actually like the tech that's actually behind a lot of our different offerings within Azure Serverless.
Legion was an internal project that we started, which actually is a backbone of Azure Container Apps consumption plan. Now it's also powering Azure Container App sessions and the new Flex consumption plan that Functions has. And it essentially is aimed at providing like low latency hyperscale for containers and provide like strong isolation guarantees for these containers. And just read up about the blog, and it's pretty exciting.
So powers Azure Functions. Yeah, and as you said, our consumption plan, and also our dynamic sessions feature that we're going to talk about later. Did I miss anything? Or do we use it for anything else that we can talk about?
I think for now, these three are the main services.
Cool. All right, and here is one of, I think it's a series of articles by Sean about running Java apps on Azure Container Apps. In this specific one, he's going through how you can use the new automatic memory fit feature for Azure, or for Java apps on Container Apps. So read that through. We have lots of new things happening around Java for Container Apps. So there should be a link somewhere for the whole series. Otherwise, just click on the blog and search for Azure Container Apps and probably Java. If the search is good, you'll actually find it. And this month, I actually found that we have tons of videos that were added to YouTube about container apps. So I'll kind of quickly go through some of them. I think we kind of referred to this last time that we talked, maybe. So there were a couple of Microsoft Reactor events about Azure Container Apps. This one is from Jonah. I actually had a chance to meet her in person a few months ago. Really cool person. And she does a talk here about building intelligent apps with container apps. And then another friend of the show, this is Christina. They have another kind of like Microsoft Reactor kind of presentation on kind of how to go from 0 to production in container apps. And here is an NDC London presentation from Johnny. Going over kind of like the basics about Azure Container Apps and the differences between Kubernetes and container apps and when you might choose each one. And here is a video from Mike in the cloud, who talks about deploying Azure Container Apps with Azure Front Door. I'll be honest, I actually didn't go through and watch all of these, but I'm sure they're great. There's a lot of content. So here's another talk by Stas about Container Apps Uncovered. Scenarios, workloads, and portability. Yeah, again, I didn't get a chance to watch this, but I'm sure it's awesome. And Will created not just one, but many videos about container apps recently. This one's about the HTTP ingress, but he actually has a whole bunch of other ones. So I think, at least in the newsletter, I kind of included a link to his playlist of all the videos that he's been kind of producing around the different features within container apps. Check that out. All right, and here we have Kamal, who actually does a pretty good explanation about workload profiles in Azure Container Apps. Yeah, like it's something that we've had for a while, but it's sometimes it is a bit of a source of confusion. But yeah, like workload profiles allows you to run both consumption plan workloads as well as dedicated plan workloads on container apps, and you choose which plan that you want each individual app to run on based on the workload profile that you select for the app. So Kamal actually goes through and talks through how all that stuff works. Oh, and this is Simon. You might have met him a couple months ago when he joined us on this live stream. He has a presentation on how to run a multi-LLM chat application with container apps. I have trouble getting one LLM to work, so he somehow got multiple of them working. So it's pretty cool. Okay, and then lastly, we have some articles on dynamic sessions, which is a new feature that we're going to talk about in a minute. So I'll kind of quickly go through that. So this is the main announcement blog post. We go through and kind of talk about why we built it, and kind of providing links to documentation and things like that about the new dynamic sessions feature. And then, as you can kind of see here, dynamic sessions, one of the things that it does really well is it allows you to run LLM generated code in a secure sandbox. And we have integrations with LangChain, Llama Index, Semantic Kernel, and actually we're working on AutoGen as well right now. So we have some articles that are published by those teams about our integration. So this one is Semantic Kernel. Somewhere here they mention, somewhere here anyway. There you go. Their integration with Container Apps Dynamic Sessions, and how you can, with a couple lines of code, kind of plug in a code interpreter into your Semantic Kernel app and make it a lot smarter. And they actually had some pretty cool demos at Build in their session. So look that up. It's got the same name as this article, Bridging the Chasm Between Your ML and Your App Devs or something. Yeah, so check that out. They have like basically some machine generated or basically LM generated Python code that actually turns on and off a light and things like that. And I think they sync it to music and things like that. So they're doing some pretty wild stuff with Semantic Kernel plus Azure Container Apps Dynamic Sessions. And here's an article from our friends at Llama Index. And yeah, so they go through and talk about how also with a couple lines of code, you can plug in a code interpreter powered by dynamic sessions into one of their apps. And we have LangChain as well, kind of doing the same thing. I think they also have a video somewhere here. So they kind of walk through the code, but they also have a video about how you can use the code interpreter in container apps to plug into LangChain and do some pretty cool stuff. And lastly, last but not least, we have Brian Benz from our Java Cloud Advocacy team. He's actually working on trying to do an integration between Azure Container Apps Dynamic Sessions and LangChain for J, which is the Java version of LangChain. And here he is here. It's just his head, but I've met him in person. He's actually it looks like he's just a floating head, but he's more than that. But he kind of goes through how you can call the Sessions API using Java. So I think that's everything in these lists. Oh, and thanks, Dick, in the chat here. He's basically saying that I forgot to update the aka.ms link that I shared earlier. It still goes to the March newsletter. So I'll go ahead and update that in a bit, maybe while later on when Sanchit is doing his portion of the talk. But yeah, so with that, thanks so much for all these links. Keep them coming. If I missed any, like I said, please share them with me, and I'll add them to the next one. And with that, like anything you want to add, Sanchit, before we jump into talking about sessions?
No, let's get started.
All right, so let's. Yeah, it's a terrible segue, but like we'll go right into talking about dynamic sessions. So, so just as a refresher, this is like some of the things that you can run on Azure Container Apps today. We have apps, which is kind of like the first kind of like resource that you can create in container apps since day one, which is really like anything that's like a web server, any kind of background processes that just continues to run, kind of like background services, I guess, and things like that. So things that aren't meant to ever stop. So so those those things run really well as Azure Container Apps. And then we kind of saw that there was a need to run kind of like job-like things that they need to run to completion. So like a process that starts up, does some stuff, and then shuts down. So we added Azure Container Apps jobs. And for jobs, you can actually kick those off on a schedule, or you can kick them off manually with an API call. And you can also have them automatically start executions based on a Kata scaler. So, so if you want a job to start for every queue message or things like that, you can do that with Azure Container Apps jobs. And then something that we added in the last year or so are these things called add-ons. And here we're talking about vector database add-ons, but we actually have other types of add-ons as well, things like Redis, Postgres. So it's a really easy way for you to just spin up a database or a data store within Azure Container Apps, well, basically within the same environment. They actually run as an Azure Container App behind the scenes, so it allows you to really kind of quickly spin these things up without spending too much time trying to figure out how to spin up a separate one in Azure. So those are kind of like the three kind of main resources that you can deploy to container apps today. But like for the last few years, actually, like even when I was working on Azure Functions, we've had developers and customers come to us and say, hey, like I actually have I'm trying to build this service where I want to take code that's given to me by my end users. So these are like untrusted code. I can't 100% trust that they have no malicious code in it. So they have to be run in isolated sandboxes. Is there a compute in Azure that I can use to run this code efficiently? And most of the time, the answer is no, unless you do a ton of work. Whether you basically do a ton of work, basically spinning up a different function app for each one of these things to run, or maybe you'd be spinning up like a Azure Container Instance, for example, for each one of these things to run. But then you have to manage these things, and they're not exactly fast to spin up, right? And Sanchit is going to cover some of the stuff later about how we make a lot of these things easy now with the new dynamic sessions feature. And I think that leads us into what we want to talk about today, which is we added a new feature in Azure Container Apps called dynamic sessions to kind of address these needs. And another kind of key things that we can do with dynamic sessions is, especially in the last year or so, as we kind of saw in the last few blog posts, the last few blog posts that we looked at, there's been kind of like a trend to basically give an AI agent access to a code interpreter. And then, sorry, Sanchit, I'm going to mute you for a bit because I can hear some background noise. But feel free to unmute yourself if you want to talk. Yeah, so there's been a trend to basically give a code interpreter to an AI agent so that it can do things more than just generate text. Things like if it needs to do math, if it needs to kind of like process files, maybe it needs to like read a file, maybe it needs to maybe analyze some data within a CSV file. It can do all sorts of things if you can give an AI agent access to a code interpreter. Because one thing that LLMs are not good at are things like math and things like that. But what it is good at is that it's able to generate code. Quite often, it's Python code, but it needs a place to run. It needs a secure place to run. So dynamic sessions fills that gap as well. It basically gives really kind of fast and kind of scalable and sandbox compute for LLM generated code to run. So that's a lot of me talking. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to talk some more. So I'll just kind of quickly go over some of the key things that we want to see from a type of sandbox that we need to run untrusted code. So the first one is security, and in Azure Container Apps dynamic sessions, each one of the sessions is actually fully Hyper-V isolated. So very very kind of strong security. And something that you would need in a to run untrusted code is that you want these things to run fast. Like you want pretty much instant access to a code interpreter. And dynamic sessions allows this to happen. And Sanchit's going to go into some more details later about how we make this happen. But even if you don't have a session created, you can basically send us some code, and we'll run that in a session in milliseconds. We'll literally allocate you a new session in milliseconds and run that code. And then you can kind of go back actually, and you can actually keep running code in that same session. So typically in an LLM scenario, you would probably have a different session per conversation that the customer might be using, might be having with your agent. Yeah, I kind of talked about how you can keep using the same session over and over again. So that's another need is lifecycle management. So the ability to kind of keep a session around so that you can actually, like for instance, upload a file to it and then send it some Python code to process the file, maybe, and then kind of grabbing the file using the download API from that. And then kind of like, like basically leaving that session around, but also having a way to automatically getting rid of it once you're done with it. So in dynamic sessions, we basically allow you to configure what's called a cooldown period. So after you stop using a session for a while, we'll automatically get rid of that for you. And lastly, you want to run this at scale. So so quite often you're not just writing like an AI agent or building like an app for one or two people. You might be building it for hundreds, thousands, maybe even more. So scalability is kind of important. And the cool thing about dynamic sessions is that it's already being used by Microsoft products today. Yeah, like we'll share more hopefully in the next few months about who's using it and what scale. But we're literally running it's millions of sessions a day for various products inside of Microsoft. So it's something that's battle tested, and we're basically allowing everyone else who's an Azure customer to take advantage of that today with dynamic sessions. All right, so like last slide, and I'll kind of jump into demos. So sessions comes in a couple of different modes. So we see a lot of scenarios that require a code interpreter. So we actually ship an out-of-the-box kind of built-in code interpreter for you to run Python code. It already has tons of packages pre-installed. So whether you're looking for things like pandas or Playwright, like really like anything you can think of is probably already pre-installed. And if it's not pre-installed, you can actually pip install it on the fly. You don't have to manage containers because we just provide you this code interpreter. And then you actually build consumption pricing. So for those of you who are familiar with OpenAI and their code interpreter in their assistance API, they're kind of priced on a per session kind of basis. So the same thing for the code interpreter in Container App Sessions. It's 3 cents per session hour. And then if that's not good enough for you, so if you want full control over what's in your code interpreter, or maybe you want to build something that's not even a code interpreter at all, you can give us a custom container and we can run that for you. And we'll talk about that in the second half of basically our demos today. Okay, so I think that's all the slides, at least for me. So what am I doing? Let's go to the portal. So I want to just quickly show you how you can access dynamic sessions today. So if you go to the Azure portal, let me make this slightly bigger. You can go and create a resource and search for dynamic sessions. Was it? Do I search for it here? No.
Session pool, yeah.
Cool. Not sure why we ranked second, but okay, that's fine. I'll talk to the right people about that. But yeah, you can go ahead and create a session pool. So for a code interpreter session, a session pool is typically a set of configurations. When you create it, it actually doesn't cost you any money. Is when you actually use the sessions in the pool. That's when you get charged. So, so here you can see that you can create a Python code interpreter session. You can create a custom container session as well, but currently not in the portal. We're still working on that. You can do that through the CLI. And there's really only a couple of settings that that you have to set. So one is how many concurrent sessions that you want to allow in a maximum. So that's really kind of allows you to kind of put some limits in place in case, you know, like for kind of cost control. But you can actually set that to a pretty high number. And then the second is the cooldown period. That's how long we wait until your last interaction with the session before we destroy it. And yeah, and other than that, you choose the region and then you click create and that's it. So I'm not going to create one because I already have quite a few sessions or session pools already created. So I'll just go ahead and click into one of them. So once you create a pool, it takes about something like 10 seconds or maybe even faster than that. You kind of have access to it in the portal. So there's a couple of things that I want to kind of point out. So one is you have access to this pool management endpoint. So when you need to interact with it, that's kind of like the key piece of information that you need. And the other thing is this playground thing where we allow you to, without kind of writing any code, like at least without kind of writing code that interacts with sessions and just to see how it works. So, so up here, you basically specify anything as your session identifier, and then you can run some code. And when I press run code, it will actually go and allocate a session for me because that session probably doesn't exist right now. And then run that code. You can see that it ran super fast and the output is displayed here. You can do a lot more than this. Like I said, like Playwright is in here. Actually, we might want to try that. Let's see. Playwright. Yeah, my computer's a little slow today, so maybe I'm not sure if we want to do this, but let's see. Python library. And you can just grab the code as is from here and drop that in here. I think the only difference is I probably want to. I think that should work. So this is some code that actually uses Playwright to launch a browser and then basically go browse to the Playwright website and get the results. And you can see that it actually grabbed the title from the Playwright website. So you can actually use sessions to do quite a bit of stuff. Like there's like I said, there's tons of libraries pre-installed. So you can potentially if you wanted to have a place where your users actually upload say in this case like Playwright scripts. And you want a secure place to run them, you can actually run them in in a session. Okay, so enough of the portal. So I was going to give you a quick kind of like practical example about how this works with LLMs, and then I'll hand it over to Sanchit. All right, so I already have this thing running. Let me close that. So I'll kind of show you a very typical LangChain application. So, so in this case, I'll point out some key things. We're using just Azure OpenAI. And this thing also does, some RAG-like stuff. So it has like a retriever. I actually took that out because that's not an important part. But one thing that I do want to show, though, is when you build an AI agent, you can give it basically one or more tools to use, right? So in this case, I can give it a tool that knows how to query, in this case, I think it's a quadrant database, to kind of get some relevant information that it can use to augment its results. Or we can also give it a code interpreter tool. And in this case, what it's going to do is that if it kind of sees a problem that it can't really solve by itself, but it knows it can write some Python code to solve, it will actually go ahead and use that tool. So it's pretty easy to use. This tool is actually built into LangChain. It actually runs Python code in the same process as my app. And then you can basically give these tools to the agent, and then the agent will just use it when it feels like it. So let me head over back to the browser. Where are you, browser? Okay, so this is the chatbot that's running. So currently I'm not using sessions at all, but because I have the Python code interpreter REPL tool thing from LangChain in the agent, I can actually tell it, give it like a math question, like what is something times something. And typically, if you go and ask an LLM this, it'll probably give you back an answer. But if you actually want to type those numbers into a into a calculator, it's actually off because it's really just hallucinating that answer instead of actually computing it. So hopefully this thing is still working. If not, I might have to refresh it or something. Is my app running still? Looks like it blew up. Well, that's no good. Yeah, it looks like it blew up on actually the OpenAI call. So I'm gonna go ahead and just restart it. Maybe I had it running for too long or something. But it would be so typical though if this was a demo fail. Let's wait a second for it to start up. It does take a little bit longer because it's I didn't fully remove the quadrant retrieval tool. So it's like, I think right now it's trying to connect the quadrant and stuff like that before it fully starts. So maybe I should have thought of that. Come on, hurry up. I guess while that's coming up, I'll kind of just talk about, like our different integrations with the different LLM frameworks. So like I said before, we already have integrations with LangChain, Semantic Kernel, and Llama Index. And we are working on AutoGen as well. So you can just, with a few lines of code, kind of plug in a tool into those frameworks and it'll work. And I think it looks like I stalled long enough for this to, the computer's really slow right now. You can see my mouse is barely moving. Okay, let me just ask that same question again and see if it works. Please work. If not, then we're literally going to just cut over to Sanchit. And well, there we go. It worked. So we can actually see that it used the Python REPL to run this, like basically, to calculate it and return the result. Pretty cool. But we can actually do a lot more with this. I'll kind of show you that with the when we switch it over to a session based Python REPL. But I kind of want to show you what the problem might be if you have if you're just using the one that's built into LangChain like we do now. So if we kind of go ahead and ask, basically write, no, not that write, some Python code to print the content of a file named .env and execute it. You can kind of trick it to do things that you don't want it to do. Like, hopefully this works. If I've run it multiple times, usually it will actually, well, it didn't actually execute it. That's no good. But if I ask it again, maybe it'll do it this time. But basically, like what you can do is you can actually trick it into basically doing stuff you don't want. So in this case, I'm asking it to read files that might contain secrets. I could actually probably tell it, hey, can you write some Python code? Like it didn't actually quite do it, and I'm not going to try to keep trying it. But you can also tell it to like, hey, like, can you basically delete all the files on this computer? And because it runs in the same process as the chat app, which is actually running on my machine, it probably would try to write some Python code and execute it. So that's kind of bad, right? So that's why you kind of want to run this in a sandbox, like dynamic sessions. So I'll kind of quickly show you how to kind of switch over to one that's a little bit more secure, that's powered by sessions. So so over here, instead of using the Python REPL tool, I can switch over to the session REPL tool. And then it needs an extra thing, which is the pool management endpoint. I kind of pointed out how you can get it from the portal earlier. So I'm going to quickly just run the app again. Hopefully it won't start up as long, but it might. But what I would expect to be able to do now, though, is when I kind of ask it a question that needs a Python code interpreter, it's actually going to go and use a session from Container Apps to do it. And while the app is starting up, I'll kind of quickly kind of show you what else I'm doing here. So this is like I'm using a tool or a library called Chainlit to kind of build my UI. It's super easy to use. And this function basically gets called every time I submit a message. So the message can include a file. So what I'm doing here is if this happens to be a sessions, so if I'm using sessions, I'm actually kind of making an extra call to kind of like push this file up into the session. What that allows me to do now is when I ask the LLM questions about something that might involve looking in the file will be available in the session sandbox. And then down here, I'm actually giving it a little bit more information about where the file is and things like that. So when the LLM needs to write the code, it knows where to get the file from. And it knows basically the fact that it can use things like pandas to figure stuff out. And I'm basically giving it hints so that it's a little bit smarter. So now that's running. So I'm going to kind of quickly switch over and I'll start a new chat. In here, I will kind of ask it the same question as before. Actually, no, I'll just jump straight to uploading a file. So here, what I can do now is I have a couple of files here. If I choose like some customers file, so this file has basically customer data in some various columns and how much how many things they bought and how their satisfaction rating and stuff like that. So we're gonna ask the questions like, so you can say like who is the customer that bought the most stuff. So behind the scenes, what's happening is I am taking that file and pushing that up to the session. And then basically the LLM is going to take over and basically interpret this question. You can see that it found the right person who has bought the most stuff. So actually you can see that it kind of took my instruction. I basically told it like, if you have to kind of like look in a CSV, you might want to look in the first few rows to understand the shape of the CSV. So I actually did that. So it was able to figure out that the total purchases dollars column is the column that it should kind of go after. So it's going to go and then it kind of writes the next pandas query to basically figure out the right answer. and then it kind of prints it out in natural language. So so that's kind of like, you know, some cool things that you can do within an AI kind of agent application by plugging in dynamic sessions. And yeah, and we made it super easy to kind of plug into any of these frameworks. Sanchit, do you have anything to add to this? I muted you, but I don't know if I can unmute you.
Yeah, no, it's just just I think you covered it mostly. Like it's just the ease of use of getting these sandboxes, and we'll talk more about like how hard it is to get it running on Azure today.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and Sanchit, if you want to start sharing your screen, we can kind of cut over to that, and you kind of go,
Yes.
over that piece.
Okay.
Do you still need me to show the slides, or you got the slides on yours too?
Actually, if you can present, that'll be great.
Okay, cool.
All right. Okay. So as Anthony was saying, essentially, Sessions is this platform that offers highly scalable Hyper-V and network isolated sandbox environments. And a part of this, when we were building this, was to keep certain agentic flows into mind, like while building this framework. It includes like how these are short-lived or transient containers, how low latency is a very important factor in building out these containers. Basically, you'd want to dispense these containers or sandboxes as quickly as possible. We need to have strong isolation guarantees for these containers. And to an end user, there should be minimal overhead. I shouldn't have to go deploy some resource, add an VNet to it, add an NSG to it, then block some rules between these resources so that they can talk to each other, and then also manage its life cycle that I have to come back and remember to clean these up, or essentially keep some of these ready to go for an end user. So with that, custom containers is actually extends what Anthony just showed. So essentially, now if you have any dynamic or transit compute tasks, which you want to use your own image and have like a function like model where you want to execute this code in a sandbox, now you can do that with a minimal overhead. So code interpreter is just one specific example which uses a platform integrated image to enable the scenario. So with that, there are two resources that we have. The first one is session pool, which is what it's on the previous.
I know. I'm trying to figure out how to go back. There you go.
Yeah. So the two resources which are here for this integration, one is what Anthony just showed, which is session pool. So this is how you would control a pool of these sandboxes or these containers. Define specifics like how many concurrent sessions you want at max, what's the network configuration, how many of these should be ready at any moment of the time that your request rate can easily essentially get all the sandboxes it need. And session is this individual instance in this pool or individual sandbox which you've tainted to a particular context. For example, if I have two customers, Foo and Bar, and I'm running a SaaS-like service or even an agent, I want the context or the files I upload, like just like how Anthony showed, in Foo's context to be isolated and also in Bar's context to be isolated. I would ideally assign them two sessions, and each of them would have their own transient sandbox environment. And we make sure these files are not persisted today. So that means like no state for the customer A versus B can be retained or shared between these two. And so one of the concepts that Anthony talked about, and I'm just going to briefly talk about it, is cooldown period. So as I was talking about, you don't have to manage the lifecycle for it. So essentially, you can set up some sort of a garbage collection or cooldown period for these sandboxes and say, if you assign to a customer A a sandbox and you have a cooldown period of 5 minutes, then essentially, if you make a call at the minute number 3, then at minute number 8, the sandbox is auto garbage collected. So you're not managing any life cycle to clean this up. And also for provisioning, you can provide any sort of alphanumeric string which identifies a customer, how you would ideally do that in your system. So there's no specific requirements. You can have any way of identifying your sandboxed environment and just pass it through to sessions. And we kind of make sure if there is a sandbox for this running already. If not, we'll go ahead and allocate one. Anthony, could you move to the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's for a second think about what if I had to do this in Azure today? And let's say we're building this thing called Nest, which is non-persistent, elastic, secure, and transient containers. So what I want to do is first I want to find out a compute resource which can be isolated so that no two users can communicate with each others. I need to find some Azure service which can do it. So it can be Azure Container Apps, it can be Azure Functions, Kubernetes, or container instances. All of these requires about 2 to 5 minutes of bootstrapping the resource. And if the image is large enough, like in any sort of code interpreter scenario where you might have a large chunk of libraries that you need, it adds up to this bootstrapping time. And then to ensure the isolation guarantees, as we were talking about, you need to have a VNet attached to these resources. You need to configure an NSG. And then not to miss, like you have to basically also manage a pool of these resources yourselves. So the goal was to basically ease out all these scenarios and build something for that. Anthony, could you go to the next slide? Yeah. So extending on that, let's say you were handling a request rate of 100 QPS, 100 queries per second, which essentially needs a new container every second, right? And then because your image is large enough, it essentially needs some minutes to download, right? So this means that for however many minutes it takes for you to create a resource plus pull the image, you have to keep a buffer of that containers ready to go so that you can essentially just satisfy your request rate. So that is a huge overhead for you to manage. And what if some of these resources fail? Then you may not be able to satisfy. So then you have to keep additional buffer to make sure like these containers can run quickly enough, and you're able to satisfy the request rate. And Anthony, to the last slide. Yeah. So from that point of view, like I was saying, you have to manage a large request and continue to track these resources. And one other point I missed was like you may need to manage like thousands of subnets because each resource will need its own subnet with its own NSG rules so that they're secure enough. So sessions basically solves these scenarios. What I can do is, Anthony, I can present the next slide and walk into the demo.
Okay, sounds good. So start presenting, and I'll add you to or add your screen share to the stream.
Yes.
Hopefully that's going to come through soon. Yeah, but while we're waiting, yeah, so it's pretty cool. Like basically, Session solves all of these problems. If you wanted to build a platform like Sessions, so you know we basically abstracted it to the two concepts that Sanchit talked about before, where you just have to create a session pool, and then there's a really easy to use API for you to access each one of these sessions. Are you able to share, Sanchit?
I think I shared. Oh.
Oh, there we go. I see something popping up. There we go. Cool.
Okay, perfect. All right. So how we implemented this and a bit of architecture deep dive, very high level. So let's say you have a session ID called test session 1 coming in, and you would, for custom containers, you would first create a manage environment, which is workload profiles enable, and this would hit the environment's gateway proxy, which is at the pool management endpoint. It would go to a pool manager and say, hey, can you allocate me a new sandbox container from the pool where I can go execute this request in context of test session one. The pool manager is going to give it some sort of a newly allocated sandbox. And then this gateway proxy is going to forward or route that request to this unallocated pod. And it's going to have, at the same time, some allocated pods also in this pool. Now, if the next request comes in, what's going to happen is the gateway proxy is not going to go to the pool manager anymore. It's going to directly hit the sandbox, because this request has this sandbox has already been tainted for a test session one, and the request is within the cooldown period. So we're going to go essentially send the request to the same sandbox, and also extend the TTL for this sandbox, because now it kind of resets the counter or the garbage collection time for the sandbox. Now we're going to look at an example, which is this web terminal example. And in this, I'm going to use Session to build my own web terminal solution. So essentially, I'm creating a front-end application, which is essentially hosting a web terminal front-end web app. And this is going to use sessions to give each user their own kind of shell, or unique identifying shell in the backend. So let me switch to my terminal here. So in the context of time, since we're already pretty late, I've already pre-created the session pool and an environment. So the way I created this was, I started by creating a workload profile enabled container apps environment. And on this environment, then I create a session pool. So what I define it, it's very similar to how you would define a container app or a pod spec. And I've just defined, hey, can you create this session pool on this environment? I've created a type, given it a target port, CPU, memory, an image. And then I define these two variables, which is max sessions and ready sessions. So max session is just like, what is the total number of sessions you would want at any moment of the time to have in the system. Like, I don't want to basically have a limit up to infinity and basically keep, if somebody is running some sort of a DOS attack, or essentially sending way too many requests to the system, I don't want to basically end up creating hundreds and thousands of these sessions. So I'm defining a max limit where I say, hey, at any moment of the time, start rejecting the request if there are more than 30 sessions, and also keep 5 sessions always ready to go, so that if there is a request, we're able to, because it depends totally on how much time it takes for me to for a new request to come from my users, and then to replenish the session container, which includes just the time to start up these containers. And then I just assign like a to this front end app, its managed identity, some sort of a execution role, where this front end app can is able to call and create these new sessions. So I'm going to hit this front end apps endpoint and essentially go into it. So you can see it has this identifier here. Let me just zoom in, which is called test sessions, and it's already connected to this user. So I'm going to just do cat foo into a file called par. Sorry, echo foo into a file called par, and then do cat par. So this file is created. I'm going to go switch to test session 2. So within under a second, I just got a new session allocated to me as well. Now I can go and look at my session pool here and see it would have already replenished my session with a container. And also, you see there's already 5 running containers here. So it already, within seconds, created new containers for the session, and also allocated 2 sessions here, which were essentially my test session 1 and test session 2. Now, if I switch back, so I can see from here, if I do an ls, I don't have the file called bar. But if I switch back to my test session, which is this, I should still have file called bar with contents foo. So you can see like creating this kind of web terminal, it would probably take you a lot of effort to essentially go build out these sandbox environments. And this makes it super easy to get onboarded and get started with building for these scenarios. That's all I had.
Wow, that's super cool. Yeah. So yeah, like it's essentially kind of showed you, we can basically, build almost like anything that we want with sessions. We're not bound to a code interpreter, although code interpreter is a key use case. So like, we just saw like a web terminal there. But if you wanted to, like, say you wanted to have some documentation with some embedded, code that you can actually just allow like the reader to run and kind of modify, you can actually build, fairly easily a platform for doing that using sessions. Same thing for, if you wanted to do an online code editor, there's probably tons of different other kind of things that you could do with this. So yeah, we actually can't wait to see what you all build with dynamic sessions. Cool. Anything else you want to add there, Sanchit?
No, yeah, this is pretty much it. And I didn't show like if this app was just using Python's PDY module, and it was just using a web socket. So you could use any protocol with the custom container sessions that you want to use with your web application. And all that was needed for me to identify these sessions was passing a query parameter, which says identifier. And essentially that's it. And that goes and creates this new session in the background.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Let me put up the link for the newsletter again. I think I updated it to the right one. I updated it, but I never tested it. So hopefully it works now. If not, hopefully it's no worse than before. So with that, yeah, please check out all the new features or all the new announcements that we had to build, including dynamic sessions, and let us know what you think. We'll probably do this again in about a month or month and a half. So until then, have fun coding.
Yeah.
See ya, everybody.
See ya. Thank you.